Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Now this isn't just any GTX 550 Ti, this is Gainward's golden sample GTX 550 Ti. I won it for cheap on eBay and it came in the original packaging with all the accessories including the Molex to 6-pin PCIe cable, a free copy voucher for Web User Magazine, a 25% off code for Loiloscope video editor. If this is still applicable, enjoy the code, and of course the original driver disc and manual. Whilst I do enjoy a used graphics card that comes with all of its original accessories, it's pointless owning all of this if the card itself is obsolete by modern standards. So just what makes this different from a standard 550 Ti, and how does it handle some modern games? Well, unlike the 900MHz reference model from Nvidia, the Golden Sample or GS version from Gainward comes clocked at 1GHz and should therefore benefit from increased performance. Released in March of 2011, the 550 Ti was based on the GF116 architecture, a modified version of the GF106 chip found inside the GTS 450 that released during the previous September. With a $150 or £100 price tag new, it was aimed at gamers on a budget, though Nvidia had dropped the GTS name in order to disassociate this card from previous lower end releases. So, can it run any modern games, and if so, how low must we turn down the settings in order to achieve at least 30 FPS? So where I would have really liked to try and target 60 FPS in most of the titles today, this just wasn't possible, so I turned the settings down as low as I had to in order to achieve somewhere close to 30 frames per second. Unfortunately, even that wasn't quite doable with this graphics card, and as you can see here from Assassin's Creed Origins, at the very low settings, 1280 by 720 with 50% resolution scaling, the game just isn't playable. If you remember, I tested this out on the 560 Ti a few videos ago, and it was a similar story there as well. Now in Battlefield 1 I actually chose to keep the resolution at 1080p, this was the default game settings, so I thought why not stick with it and see what happened, and to my surprise the game averaged 33 frames per second at 1080p low. Turning things down to 720p would have given us a slightly better frame rate, but oddly enough the stutters increased, and as it was, the 1% and 0.1% low figures here weren't too brilliant in the first place, although in my opinion this game is definitely playable on this older card. Just don't expect higher settings or 60 frames per second constantly. The resolution scale slider was also not touched and it was at 100% here. Another wartime shooter now, this time it's World War II with Call of Duty World War II, and here at 720p with the lowest settings the game ran quite well, to be honest, with 52 frames per second. 1080p was sort of out of the question as it caused heavy dips below 30 frames per second, but 720p seemed to do the trick just fine, and with 50 FPS I really can't complain too much with the gameplay, and the 0.1% and 1% low figures weren't too bad either. This is the stronghold level of the game, so you can expect different performance across each of the maps and of course multiplayer gameplay. Ghost Recon Wildlands now at the lowest in-game resolution, and as you can see here this really wasn't playable at all. As it was, the game didn't look very good, and the frame rate wasn't too great either, with just 23 FPS on average. The 1% and 0.1% lows came back at 18 and 14 respectively, meaning that the stutter wasn't too bad. In fact, there really wasn't much stutter. The frame rate was just low and constantly low to start with, no matter where we were on the map. Now with GTA 5, if you turned everything all the way down to low, then you could achieve at least 60 frames per second, but I decided to try and implement a little more graphical quality here and turned a few things up to high. Even so, the frame rate came back at 53 on average at 1080p, granting us a very nice gameplay experience here. But of course GTA 5 is now a few years old, and so you should expect it to run on an older card without many issues. Next up we have Kingdom Come Deliverance, perhaps the newest release on this list today. At 720p with the lowest settings, unfortunately we could not get playable frame rates out of this GPU, but we came so close to 30 FPS with 25. However, as the action heats up and you start to get into sword fights and things like that, the game will drop quite a bit, and this average was taken just from walking around the town for about half an hour interacting with different characters, and as you can see by the 1% and 0.1% lows, there really isn't too much stutter, but the frame rate is quite low to begin with, so if you do want to play this game on a card like this, expect sort of 20 to 30 FPS most of the time, though I would avoid it altogether on this 550 Ti. Next up we have Overwatch, which runs like a dream. 1080p with the low preset saw 67 frames per second on average, a very respectable number in my opinion, with 1% and 0.1% lows of 55 and 49, meaning that there was no real stutter to speak of. Overwatch is definitely playable on this graphics card. The footage you see on screen is from an AI match, but all of the figures today were taken from online matches across 3 different maps. Next up, it's PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds at 720p with the very low preset. Now this game has seen a few performance patches over the past few months which have helped things out a little bit, though we came up short to that 30 frames per second that I was hoping for in this title. In The Witcher 3 we scraped 30 frames per second, 31 in fact, and the game actually performed better than I thought it would, although you will see some stutter here and there. These figures were taken from inside Novigrad, one of the most demanding areas in the game, so once you're outside of the city the game should perform a little bit better. And finally we have Rise of the Tomb Raider at 720p with the lowest quality preset. We saw 40 frames per second. You could turn things up to low and still achieve around 30 frames per second on average, but for me this was the best way to play. It doesn't look that great, but again, it is playable to most of you I'm sure, though if you want 60 frames per second then it's probably best to avoid an older card like this altogether. That being said, the GTX 550 Ti is still capable in some modern games at both 1080p and 720p, though you should expect to have to turn these settings right down. I'm sure this golden sample version does provide a few extra frames over the reference models, but it may start to struggle in some of those newer releases out there. But guys, this has been a look back at the 550 Ti. I hope you've enjoyed this video testing it out against 10 modern games. If you did, leave a like down below. If you didn't, leave a dislike. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, and hopefully I'll see all of you in the next one.